Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Hopefully your day started off better than mine. All right. Welcome to this presentation around Small But Mighty, how to leverage technology in smaller places or spaces. I'm Zach Boehm. I'm the Vice President of Innovative Systems for AHS.
I'm David Willis, and I'm account manager for AHS. I report into Zach.
Perfect. So Dave will go ahead and get us started, and we'll start the presentation. Take her away, Dave.
Good morning, guys. Just wanted to kind of walk through microfilament, just give you a little background. I have about 16 years in manufacturing, supply chain, food and beverage, spirits. Of the last 5 years is when I've really been in the microfulfillment arena in the automation e-commerce world. So this presentation is going to be more driven by experience and then what we've learned, through the course of 4 to 5 years, and hopefully give you guys some tools to, if you're looking to dig it, start up an MFC, give you some tools or kind of a guidance for developing that strategy. So what is microfulfillment? Essentially, what it is, in essence, is to get the product as close to the end user as possible. And essentially, in a nutshell, that's what it is. But as simple as that definition is, it is a lot more complex. There is a lot more that goes into it. It is not as simple as finding a small square foot building and just erecting it and thinking you're going to be able to get product out the door. A lot of the things that, that I've learned throughout my last 5 years of microfulfillment is really around the infrastructure in the market analysis to understand the demographics that you're going to serve. What is your customer profile? What is your assortment going to look like? If you guys work with merchandisers and procurement guys, and I've worked in that arena for a number of years, you appreciate their appetite to get as many SKUs into a format or a planogram as much as they can. But with microfulfillment, it is all driven off velocity. It is crucial in order for you to make sure you have positive cash flows, to make sure that your cost to serve is as minimal as possible, to not only ensure that you're giving the customer the best experience, but also ensuring that you're meeting the budget requirements of your business. So I can't stress enough the importance that technology, your strategy, and your market analysis all have to be integrated to develop that robust strategy in order to execute and initiate a sustainable microfulfillment operation. So kind of getting a little bit deeper, there are a lot of intertwining network that goes into microfulfillment. There are multiple modalities or multiple ways you can start up. That is the amazing petri dish that is the MFC. And that is, why I kind of fell in love with that arena, because it challenges you every day. It makes you think differently. And it also gives you avenues of not kind of starting or working in that traditional format. From my career, my experience, I've had the pleasure of starting where we used kind of modular refrigerated units. We would put them out in a more rural area, and then a customer would be able to come pick up the product. They would send the order through our OMS, and then they would be able to just go pick up the product where they want. We've also had the ability to start a spoken hub kind of microfulfillment, and that's really where you're kind of a cross-dock solution. You're able to really kind of get your microfulfillment nodes deeper in and closer to your customer base, all while kind of making sure you're out of stocks and your inventory is flowing in a real-time situation. That is super critical. Inventory, on-time deliveries, you have one shot to make sure that the customer is satisfied and fulfilled with your product and your product offering. And that is why it is crucial, before you turn that switch on in the microfulfillment world, that you've done your diligence to understand how you want to roll your operation out, the customer demographic you want to serve, and how you're going to execute from a technology perspective. Because you can have all the automation in the world, but if you don't have a true end-to-end integrated solution, you will never be able to serve the customer in the capacity that you need to. So scaling your operation, like I said, micro-fulfillment, the benefit and beauty of it is it allows you to work in a small footprint. You know, traditional kind of DCs can be as large as 1 million square foot. When I got introduced into the e-commerce arena, my first building that my team and I stood up was about 500,000 square feet. It was a traditional e-commerce online order fulfillment kind of operation. And that's really where we're able to kind of test and work and figure out how we really wanted to develop our MFC strategy and how we were going to kind of flow out into our network. But really scaling that operation in that small footprint, it just gives you the agility and flexibility to really get into markets that you traditionally would not be able to get into, which is a true benefit with, as you all know today, labor market. The just astronomical cost that we're incurring today is really driving the need for micro-fulfillment. Apologies. All right. It's been a while. I don't know if I like this. It like pops, doesn't it? Should I go to the microphone? Okay. All right, sorry about that. So what are some, like, really, when you're scaling your operation, what is really important that you really need to focus on? You really need to make sure your strategy focuses on multiple fronts. Are you going to do last mile? Are you going to, kind of procure that last mile out? Are you going to get in the fleet business? Are you going to really drive a more automated solution, or are you going to do a manual solution? I've had the ability in my career to do, I'd say, 2 sites that were traditional manual, cart picking, packing, and shipping. And then I've had the ability to do a co-located store that was semi-automatic from a shuttle perspective. The complexity with doing a co-located store was really the out of stock, making sure the real-time inventory was succinct and it was driving, because the last thing you want to do is call the customer or cancel the order because you don't have the inventory available. So it is important, in order to make sure the customer experience is fulfilled, it is met, that your assortment is not so big that you just can't manage it. It is truly want to focus on high velocity SKUs that drive probably in that 17,000 to 20,000 assortment range. Your kind of super high A movers, that really drive kind of the market that you're serving in that area. Because, inventory control from an operations perspective is super critical. It can be kind of the death spiral that we call in the operation world for, cost to serve and operational cost, and making sure that you keep those as low as possible. Inventory control has to be linked to your order management system as well as your WMS. So having that order velocity, that assortment velocity is crucial to making sure your cash flows are positive and making sure that you're meeting your budgetary requirements. So cost to serve, as you look from an operations perspective, cost to serve is one of those main metrics that you just have to focus on and make sure, especially with the labor market today. If you guys have ran an operation, ran a retail location, you understand the labor market and the premium rates that are being driven and charged in this arena. So it is truly a focal point as you roll out your strategy, as you roll out your micro-fulfillment operational execution, that you truly dig into how you're going to drive your lowest cost to serve. And that's the great thing about micro-fulfillment, is it gives you the flexibility if you do want to start up a manual operation. You can do that super easy, super cheap, but have the vision, have the long-term thought to say, how are we going to become more efficient? How are we going to become more automated? How are we going to make sure that we're making sure we're driving our cost to serve, improving our customer experience, and making sure that we're gaining market share in this environment, because it is super critical. I think it is projected that MFC's profit growth in the next 10 years is going to exceed $40 billion. So this is the way forward for a lot of retail and operational companies. So it is important that you kind of develop that strategy, make sure that you're thinking through how you're going to pick, what's your WMS, how are you going to integrate all those important pieces to drive that succinct, efficient engine to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the customer. And what really, from my past experience, one thing that looking back, hindsight's always 20/20, right? So you always say, we wish we'd have done this. But the one thing, the technology, we really focused in that software arena, but we really didn't until later in the journey focused on the automation. And I think looking back, it is worth the investment. It is worth the investigation to understand what is your vision, what is your mission, is this a long-term sustainable kind of strategy that you plan to roll through your enterprise? And if it is, I truly think technology and the automation will serve and be a return on investment that'll take you to that next level in the MFC arena. And I believe that Zach can provide us a little bit more detail into that technology.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so I'm a mover when I talk, so I apologize. So what are the technologies to consider in your micro-fulfillment space? And e-commerce in that space is growing very, very quickly, projected to grow 20x over the next 10 to 15 years. So not only do you need to select the right technology to consider, but you also have to have a technology that can grow with your process and also be around for the next 10 to 15 years, or maybe even longer than that. So it needs to be something that's scalable and flexible. And that's one of the things we talk a lot when we look at different types of technologies in this space. So really breaking down some of the biggest sectors, and it's goods to person, right? Bringing the product to the person to pick, instead of picking like Dave was talking about when they first started, picking the carts, walking through different aisles, looking at different SKUs, and then you have to slot those products in the right spaces. Plus, Dave talked about a lot of the velocity of SKUs are high movers, right? And so if you're familiar with goods to person, you need to make sure you select the right goods to person systems, because at times that can be challenging. So when you look at Lowbay, this is where we're going to talk about lower height ceilings, sometimes brownfield facilities, especially some of these micro-fulfillment facilities are within a highly densely populated area, maybe a building that's 10, 15, 20, 30 years old. So there's several key technologies that you could take a look at when you look at your strategy. So with the Lowbay solutions, order fulfillment strategies combat size constraint as well as adapt to pre-existing layouts. So this is an example of the Kaha technology. It's one of our technology partners that really has a great fit when your floor is not perfect. Your ceiling height isn't 40 feet. Or maybe you're in the back of a store, or as Dave was talking about, he had a fulfillment space where there was a store and there's also a fulfillment space in that same area. So those are really good technologies to consider. This design also allows for operation in smaller footprint while achieving overall operational efficiencies in the cost to serve model. As Dave was talking about, the cost to serve model is you want a technology that you can grow with, one that's not going to be extremely expensive right off the bat, and then you could put into a space and then continue to grow and adapt with your ever-changing SKU velocity. And I'll have questions that will bring Dave back up because he had a lot of great points, and I think there's some good questions that might come from the crowd too as well. So where is this technology ideal at? Really in 5 to 10,000 square feet. This technology we've done much larger than that, but it's really a great fit in that smaller space, typically about 12 to 18 foot height ceilings, and really working within the density of that space and getting the most out of it. And again, keeping the operator at a station, picking from the different types of technologies. Also, you have enhanced inventory accuracy capabilities. So we've all been in a facility where you have to go manually walk through the same picking space in order to drive inventory. With a lot of these technologies we'll talk about, that person can stay at a station and bring that inventory up to be able to do checks, make adjustments, those types of things through the software. So Highbay technology. So this would be more like a technology where you may have 30, 35, 40 feet clear. You're going to want to utilize the cube as much as you possibly can. And you'll hear a lot of people in this space talk about utilizing the cube. The square footage cost is extremely valuable in this type of scenario. So it's very agile for high-performing automated systems. This is an image of a Exotech SkyPod system. And one of the things that's very unique is they are a true order driving fulfillment engine. So when the robot leaves the station, goes and gets the product, brings it back, it's somewhere around 2 to 2.5 minutes, depending upon the space that's available for the storage. And it's really driving that reactivity. So they want that high-performing automated systems. And they've also done systems too, as well as once they pick the order, they could also store it within the storage within that system too, as well, and use it as like a buffer space. That way you could pre-pick the orders, store it, and then bring it out very quickly once the consumer shows up in order to pick up their orders or going out to deliver in that type of example. It's very efficient design, which eliminates operational deficiencies. A lot of the stations in this space are multifunctional stations. So the SkyPod system, as an example, you could do picking, you could turn that over into replenishment, you could also turn that into cycle counting. Some of those operations can also be done outside the system, but what it really helps was operational efficiency, keeping it simple and making sure that you don't have to train people on multiple different processes. And that's really important, especially right now where everybody is hurting for people, right? Everybody is chasing the next employee that they could bring into their facility, and you want to keep that training program of that technology extremely simple. And you want them to be able to do multiple processes within that space. And if you're not thinking that way, you really should start considering that way, because that's where you have to go with that type of challenge. This is designed for a larger scale operations, so 10,000 to 150,000 square feet. As Dave was talking about different definitions, we've been working with some customers on their definition of micro-fulfillment, and that could be up to a 500,000 square feet space. So I was at Manifest earlier this year, and we were talking about the definition of micro-fulfillment. Everybody has a slightly different definition. Dave was sharing his experience in the grocery space and the food space of what their definition is, but it truly can be multifunctional depending upon what space you're looking at the technology for. And then this is really the ideal goods-to-person solution. Again, you're trying to drive order reactivity. You want a technology that is extremely scalable and flexible, but also gives you that speed. And as an example, with some technologies, if the order profile changes, you could add more robots to drive more presentations to the picker. That way you can get more product out of it. So really what you look at is what can the operator physically touch at that station and be able to drive the units per hour out of that picker, and then you look at the bin presentations in order to drive that out of there. So if you're only picking one unit, you're going to need more bin presentations, but if you're going to pick 4 or 5 units, you might be able to drive less bin presentations, but also be able to drive your unit throughput actually through the roof comparable. So in summary, Dave and I will go ahead and ask some questions, but we'll hit this summary slide. Really, e-commerce growth is projected to exceed over $175 billion in the next 3 to 5 years. And your strategy for operating plan must be designed to withstand the aggressive growth. And that's something that we work with our customers, it seems like, every single day. We all might be getting ready to hop on a call as soon as we get out of this presentation to talk about those challenges and how you're going to help your clients or help get your product to the consumers. And you want to leverage automated micro-fulfillment model. That way your company will be able to do multiple things, including deliver products to your consumers faster, reduce last mile costs, and reduce overall costs to serve as much as 70%. So one of the things that Dave talked about is when they first started on their journey in his past, they really focused in on software. But everything was more of a manual type operation. But as you heard him talk about his journey going through micro-fulfillment, one of the things they looked at is they looked at technology much closer. That meant that technology was becoming more mature in that space, being more flexible, scalable in that space in order to drive what he was doing. So software is important, but software is only going to get you to a certain point. And that's one of the reasons why we started talking about and looking at goods-to-person systems in this presentation. So Dave, this is our contact information up here if you want to reach out to Dave or I. But this is where we're going to open it up. We really want this presentation to be informal, work back and forth, ask questions. I'll run around. We could ask questions with a microphone. But Dave, I've got a couple warm-up questions for you because you're the expert. So tell us a little bit about data and how important data is in getting the right data in order to size or understand your velocities and take the next steps in your micro-fulfillment journey.
Yeah, I think data is essentially is probably step 1B in your strategy build out. You know, you look at your market analysis, you figure all that piece of the pie out, but really the next evolution or next step is really understanding your cube, understanding your days on hand. You know, are you going to carry a week? What's the demand? What's the pull system telling you? And I think really the analytics behind that, and that's really why we focused on the technology piece, because we knew that we could always come back. We always had the vision to come back and build the operation to an automated state. But we knew without the critical foundations of data, understanding the analysis of what the demographics were serving, how deep into the kind of demographic do we want to get? How many nodes do we want to have? Do we want to have spoken hub model, co-located, true dark stores? You know, that was really all driven by the analytics. It really drove our assortment, because I'll never forget one of the VPs said, we want 52,000 SKUs. And I said, that's a traditional DC, traditional retail store. So really, we were able to use data to drive down our SKU assortment to under 20,000, and it was critical to our inability to be efficient and serve the customer.
Perfect, thank you. Is there any questions from the crowd? If not, I've got a lot more questions we can ask Dave and just get as much information out of him as we can over the next, I think we only really have about 15, 20 minutes left because I think we started the timer a little late. Any questions? Let me come over here.
So my question's on the low profile setup. So when you have it set up coming in, how many products do you have to be picking, let's say in an hour's time, to justify the cost of that material coming out? What's the capacity?
What's the capacity and the ROI around that is really what the question was around.
Yeah, I think really when you look at the labor, that's really what drives your ability to see the ROI. Because you look at a picker, like Zach talked about, those pick engines take 2 to 3 minutes to pick your assortment, pick your product. It also, with that Lowbay profile, you're able to work in a much smaller footprint. So you think of a back store where you have hardly any room, that Lowbay profile really pays for itself because you're able to take a tack time or a pick time of, let's say, like 42 minutes. You drive it down to 2 minutes. I mean, you're cutting your labor astronomically. And I mean, that in itself will probably pay back in months, you know, where if you would continue to go down that more manual kind of pick and pass kind of deal, I think that's really where the advantage is with that Lowbay profile.
Perfect. Another question.
Thank you so much. So we looked at examples for like finished goods or completed order picking. I'm really interested in raw material picking and class 1, div 1 situations. And it'd be really nice to talk about that in a Lowbay profile scenario.
Perfect. Dave, did you hear that question?
From a raw material perspective?
Yes. Class 1, div 1 material.
Oh, hazmat, all that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you think of all the nuances that go into hazmat, right, you're able to really take the people, the safety piece of it to a degree. You think of all those kind of SOPs and procedures you got to put in place. Allowing the Lowbay profile, allowing the robotics to do the work really allows you to become more efficient because you're able to reallocate that labor to a more critical area of the operation. From a raw material perspective, I think, each industry carries its own uniqueness. And I think that's where your analysis really will drive kind of the solution you need to have and the requirements you need to have. Is there like specific raw material you're talking about? Are you allowed to give?
Mhm. Yeah, these are all good questions. So the first thing is each OEM might handle it a little differently, right? And it really depends upon the density of storage in that footprint when you start looking at those different types of product. So I'll use some examples of some of the technologies that we talked about. They may need in-rack sprinklage, right? They may need more in-rack sprinklage than what they normally would. They may have to segment the product to a specific area or slightly different system that may affect then speeds of picking, or you may have to start picking one order in one system and pick it in the other system in order to separate that product and keep that depending upon what product we're specifically talking about, or flammables or those types of things.
I think OSHA, right? OSHA and your DOT requirements will drive a lot of that. You never think of like whipped cream being a hazmat, but it is. And if you transport it, you got to take special precautions. So I think it's really getting with your engineers. Insurance drives a lot. Like, you think the sprinkler piece of the puzzle, right? Are you allowed to have plastic bins? Do you have to have corrugated bins? So I think really working back with your team and your, like, the insurances and your H&S really will drive the solution to what you need.
Yeah, Dave, I think you said something really important in there about insurance, and then your local municipality too as well, and understanding, have they seen technologies like this before? We work with some local municipalities where we go out and show them the technology we're working with, and they've never seen it before. So sometimes you have to do a major education with them in order for them to understand exactly what you're looking at putting in there. And then insurance is key too as well, because we may have the best design or the best concept, but really it comes down to the insurance of the client and those types of things you got to definitely consider. I think there's a question over here.
Thank you. So you mentioned stripping A movers for high velocity. I work with a lot of single node e-commerce customers, and I think it's fair to say if you moved into this micro fulfillment setting that you're going to degrade your productivity, increase split packages, moving to that first micro fulfillment center. So how do you have that conversation with your customer? What kind of order profile works for this micro fulfillment center? If you're going from like a 3 to 4 UPO type of fulfillment model and you're taking your A movers, your high velocities into this micro fulfillment center, now I have split cartons. So how do you have that cost benefit analysis conversation with the customer if they're really looking for that more Amazon type of experience? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think from that perspective, you look at the last mile, and I think in my past and my career, we went all in. We bought fleet, and then we really, you think of drivers, you think of insurance, you think of fuel, maintenance, depreciation of the assets. You paint that picture for the customer and say, by moving your high moving SKUs, because this is what your customers want, you get the goal of microfilament is get the product to the end user as close as possible. If you're able to eliminate that last mile cost, which is when somebody figures out that algorithm, they'll never work again, right? It's just a painful part of an operation, but it's an inherent thing that you have to execute. And above all else, you cannot fail the customer. The customer experience, you get one shot in e-com. And if you fail that, and you got to paint that picture with the customer, say, not everything's going to give you an ROI of 4 months and $5 million. They're the soft underlying iceberg items. The quality of the product. You think of perishables. The closer and the less time it sits on that shelf at MFC, the more the better the quality of the product. So there's nuances, and you just got to sit back and kind of weigh out the risk, the analysis, the benefits, and the cost-benefit analysis to really say, by doing this, by getting the node further upstream, closer to your end user, you eliminate that last mile cost. And there's a plethora of items in that last mile that a lot of people don't think before they kind of dive into the MFC fulfillment world. Does that answer?
So I'll add a little bit to that too as well, because it'll apply into a little bit of the technologies that we talked about, right? And we talked a little bit about data, how important good data is, good forecasting. And we all have been there. Forecasts are wrong, right? That's kind of my thing when I get on a call and we look at forecasts, and because sometimes they're very, very aggressive. But what you need is you need to align with a software and a technology in that space. So you're looking for automation that today could have an A mover and tomorrow could be a D mover, or vice versa. And so we've got into some of these spaces. I wouldn't quite call them micro-fulfillment. Again, goes back to the definition of micro-fulfillment. But we've looked at systems where we're really designing to the peak hour because we need to be able to drive that reactivity. And that's one of the reasons why we've paired with some of the technologies that we have, because when we get into those types of situations as an integrator, right, not being an OEM, we want to bring the right solution and the right technology to our customer. And so as much as we can look at the data and those types of things, it all boils back to what is the most flexible technology that you could put in there. And sometimes, depending upon the process, a more manual or semi-automatic process may be the most flexible until you get into the first couple years of the system. That's one of the reasons why we also partner with some of the technologies that can grow and expand and come in at a much lower cost and then expand into the square footage. Some of the partners that we also have allow you to manually pick out of a certain area and then do the goods to person in another space, right? So the aisles are wide enough that you could have manual pickers and you segment it off from the technologies. So that way during different times of the year, you may put your A movers that are in there and your slower movers that are in the automated space. But you want that flexibility, and you need to be able to design in that flexibility so you don't end up in the position that you're talking about. That's a good question.
I think that's where like split and merge helps you too. So if you're like, you think of the hub and spoke model, right? You got that hub, that's the central heartbeat. And if it's as close to those nodes, which are even closer to the customer, you're able to really drive that cost to serve way down, because you're able to really take your slower movers, put them in an environment that you can maybe have less days of cover, let them sit for a little bit, but you're able to continue the inventory turns. And that's just kind of some of the things you got to paint the picture for those companies, because, you know, again, I'll go back to it. That last mile, you look at gas right now, right? Diesel fuel, $6 a gallon. I think of, let's see, our first two MFCs, we had 42 fleet vehicles. And looking back now, that was when gas was like $2 a gallon. If we did it now, it's totally changed your miles. So you got to paint multiple pictures for them and just show the cost benefit for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to highlight too as well, Dave. It's not just the technology and everything inside the four walls, but everything on the outside and how you're going to do that, especially with times like today and fuel being the cost of what it is.
Right. I mean, one thing I look back and I think of all the painful hours and, 16-hour days, and it's like I look at these technologies and the cost benefit alone, like Exotech. I had picking operations as high as 80 pickers at one time, and if I'm able to shrink that down to 6 pickers, just because you're able to triple and quadruple your productivity, it's a life changer for an operations, and it also improves your overall business model.
Perfect. Are there any other questions? No problem. Dave, I have a question for you. For the audience, one thing in your experience, hindsight's always 20/20. What would you have done? What's one thing you would have done differently in your micro-fulfillment career that you did, that you wish you didn't do, that you now know today?
The biggest one is not starting up a facility in 37 days. I don't recommend doing that on any level, because you get some aggressive individuals that you report to, and we all have them, right? But you've got to, as much as you can, think of the long-term quality, the long-term customer. But really, I probably would have put more emphasis on true end-to-end technology, all the way from order management to WMS to the inventory. Like we struggled in the inventory arena because we used multiple systems and it fed. And there was just a lot of gap. I probably would have had a more synchronized technology end-to-end solution compared to kind of how we bridged it over the course of time.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions? Yeah, there's a question over here. Perfect. Let me head over.
So you mentioned that you were going to use more synchronized systems. What kind of systems did you use?
We used High Jump in the, since it's a pretty out of the box system. High Jump was our main WMS. The others were internal networks and systems that were built by the IT team, which I can't share. So
You might not be able to talk about some of them.
we can take it off.
It's a good question, though. Well, that if there are no other questions, that rolls into this. So Dave and I will be at the booth at B9204. That's the high-tech AHS booth. It's over on that side of the hall. But yeah, definitely stop over, talk to us if you want to learn more about some of the technologies that we talked about, or if you want to learn more about and pick Dave's brain about some of the things that he learned in micro-fulfillment as well as space. Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you very much, Dave. There's also two of the technologies that we talked about, Kaha. I don't have their booth number right off the top of my head, but also Exotech, the SkyPod system too as well. Those are two of our main goods-to-person technologies that we work with. Would love to bring you over to their booth, come to our booth, go to their booth, ask them about micro-fulfillment. What's their strategy? How does their technology work? See if it compares to some of the things that we're saying of where we see their technology fitting and why it fits in those spaces. But those are really two great technologies in this space that we're really deploying those technologies. They're more newer to the U.S. market, but they're catching on extremely quickly, and we've got quite a few deployments that are being very successful in large facilities, but also small returns or micro-fulfillment style facilities. And I think that's it. Didn't even put a thank you slide. But thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today.